This is one of the most heartbreaking stories of human survival in inhuman conditions. The icy shell not only stopped the ship's movement, it began to methodically crush its sturdy wooden hull. The dull, drawn-out creaking of breaking oak frames echoed across the endless white desert. The sailors stood on the icy deck, feeling it slowly give way beneath their feet under the monstrous pressure. The air temperature had dropped so low that every cloud of breath instantly turned into sharp ice crystals. At that very moment, the reality of their situation hit the crew harder than any ocean storm. The ocean around them lost its familiar appearance and turned into a twisted field of white stone. Huge ice floes slowly crept over each other, making sounds like cannon shots. The wind drove fine snow dust across this dead landscape, blinding people and getting into their collars. The horizon was completely empty, offering no clue or sign of life. It was the first day of their real test, the scale of which no one could yet comprehend. People looked at each other and saw their own hidden fears reflected in the eyes of others. No one heard cries for help because there was no one to cry out and no reason to do so. They found themselves cut off from the rest of the world by an impenetrable wall of frozen northern ocean. The world continued to live its normal life, but for the crew, time had stopped forever. The horizon was empty, and the captain knew perfectly well that there was nothing encouraging beyond this emptiness. The icy desert around the ship seemed like an endless backdrop for the grim tragedy unfolding. They looked at the dead white expanses, gradually saying goodbye to thoughts of an early return home. Their expedition, which had begun with loud speeches and high ambitions, had run into a brick wall of reality. On that day, the long countdown to their slow demise at the edge of the inhabited world began. They did not know it yet, but this was the moment when they ceased to be explorers and became survivors. The expedition was conceived in warm offices, where the smell of expensive cigars mingled with the aroma of fresh printing ink. Newspaper headlines promised the imminent conquest of the North Pole through the mysterious warm currents of the Bering Strait. Confidence in the success of the venture was based on the false theory that hot water currents cut a path through the polar ice. The crew was selected from among the strongest and most experienced sailors, ready for any hardship for the sake of glory. None of them yet understood the scale of the deception hidden behind beautiful scientific hypotheses. The ship's holds were filled to the brim with coal, provisions for several years, and the latest equipment of the time. People boarded the ship with their heads held high to the sounds of solemn marches and the cheers of the crowd seeing them off. They believed in the power of the human mind and the might of steam engines, capable of withstanding any whims of harsh nature. The contrast between this sunny hope and the future icy catastrophe was hidden behind a veil of blind optimism. He still believed that it was temporary, looking at the first ice floes in the cold waters of the north. Captain DeLong carefully studied the route, relying on the authoritative opinions of geographers and explorers of previous years. The preparation was perfect. Every detail of the equipment was checked repeatedly to rule out the slightest possibility of a fatal mistake. The sailors sewed warm clothes from the finest furs, anticipating long winter nights in the comfort of a sturdy ship. They considered themselves masters of the situation, ready to dictate their terms to the unexplored edge of the earth. At first, it seemed like a delay when the first fields of pack ice appeared on the horizon, blocking their path. Discipline on board was perfect. Each sailor knew his duties clearly and performed them flawlessly. Faith in the captain's infallibility made people ignore the growing sense of anxiety at the sight of endless white fields. They still hoped that they would soon reach open water and continue their triumphant advance toward the pole. The surrounding world was becoming increasingly hostile, depriving them of their familiar landmarks and sense of security. That day marked the beginning of their descent into a real nightmare from which there was no waking up. The frost grew stronger with each passing day, turning the rigging into thick glass rods that cut their hands to the bone. The sailors on watch wrapped themselves in heavy sheepskin coats, trying to keep their rapidly freezing bodies warm. The wooden deck was covered with a layer of slippery ice, making any movement a dangerous test of agility. Illusions crumbled one after another under the onslaught of the indifferent power of the approaching Arctic winter. He was not prepared for what would happen next when the first heavy blow of ice shook the hull of the ship. The warm current had turned out to be a deadly trap, luring them into the heart of the impenetrable ice fields. The realization of their mistake came slowly, poisoning their minds and undermining their confidence in the correctness of their chosen path. They still called it a delay, but it was already a trap that had slammed shut behind them. The dazzling white space around the ship resembled a giant operating room where nature was preparing to dissect their hopes. The contrast between the cozy past and the icy future became unbearably sharp with each new day of the delay. They had brought with them a piece of the civilized world, but that world proved powerless against the permafrost. None of them yet understood the scale of what was happening when the ship finally became stuck in the pack ice. The story of their ambitions ended, giving way to a brutal struggle for simple physical survival. September brought with it a final cold snap, freezing the sea with a solid layer of ice as hard as granite. The ship was trapped on all sides, becoming a helpless prisoner of the endless white desert. Supplies were being used strictly according to the norm, but everyone understood that they were far from infinite. Communication with the outside world was cut off the moment the coastline disappeared behind the snowy horizon. The captain decided to prepare for winter, realizing that liberation before spring was absolutely impossible. Attempts to break through the channel with saws and explosives yielded no tangible results. The black powder only scattered pieces of ice, which were instantly replaced by new water. People collapsed from exhaustion, their hands rubbed raw by the handles of long ice saws. They looked at each other and saw fear that could not be hidden behind a mask of feigned bravery. At that moment, they ceased to be a team of conquerors and became prisoners of an icy prison. The temperature continued to drop, freezing the moisture out of the air and turning it into prickly dust. Thick woolen clothing no longer protected them from the piercing wind blowing across the open deck. Every touch of metal left burns on the skin, tearing the epidermis to bloody wounds. But time was already working against him, against every person on this frozen wooden island. Panic spread faster than the cold, infecting minds and undermining what remained of Army discipline. The commander's orders were still being carried out, but the sailors' eyes revealed silent resignation and exhaustion. Life had shrunk to the confines of the locked ship, beyond which certain and inevitable death reigned. The isolation became physically unbearable, weighing heavily on the psyche with monotonous gray days. Some already understood how it would end, looking at the jagged ice floes approaching the very sides of the ship. It was at this moment that discipline cracked, allowing animal fear to break free. Water began to accumulate in the holds due to microscopic cracks in the ship's overstressed oak plating. The pumps worked around the clock, forcing exhausted people to pump ice water for hours in complete darkness. The rhythmic thumping of the pumps was the only sign of life in the frozen white silence of the Arctic. Nature made no distinction between officers and sailors, punishing everyone equally harshly. Everything was decided here and now, in a constant struggle with the water that sought to engulf the ship. The stop turned into an endless drift along with the ice field in an unknown direction. The maps became useless pieces of paper that did not reflect their real position in the ocean. It was a turning point when they realized their absolute insignificance in the face of the elements. No one wanted to take responsibility for acknowledging the obvious and inevitable end. From that day on, the expedition was over, and a harsh, merciless survival without rules began. The cold penetrated their skin, freezing the blood in their veins and turning every movement into torture. The icy air burned their lungs with every breath, causing bouts of painful, racking dry coughs. The fingers on their hands lost all feeling, turning into inflexible wooden appendages covered with deep cracks. Frostbite became commonplace, black patches of dead tissue appearing on the faces and limbs of the exhausted sailors. They no longer counted the days, they counted the chances of living to see the next agonizing morning. Hunger slowly but surely sapped what little physical strength they had left, turning them into walking skeletons. Their meager rations consisted of tiny portions of salted meat and crackers, which had to be soaked in melted water. The lack of fresh food led to the first signs of scurvy, which destroys teeth and joints. Weakness bound their bodies, forcing people to move across the deck with the slow, shuffling steps of old men. Each step became heavier than the last, requiring incredible willpower from their exhausted bodies. Diseases spread at an alarming rate in the cramped, poorly ventilated quarters. The humidity in the cabins contributed to the development of infections, and the lack of medicine made treatment impossible. The moans of the sick echoed through the corridors, merging with the incessant creaking of the ship's frames. The fatigue was so overwhelming that many dreamed of simply closing their eyes and never waking up again. Some were already calculating who would be the weak link in this merciless chain of survival. Fear paralyzed their will, robbing them of their ability to think rationally and make sound decisions. The constant anticipation that the ice would finally crush the ship was driving the sailors mad. Some began to talk to themselves, muttering incoherent phrases in the dark corners of the cabin. He began to speak aloud simply to hear a human voice in this realm of eternal silence. Isolation nullified all signs of civilization, exposing animal instincts of self-preservation. Hallucinations became commonplace, with green trees and warm houses appearing in his exhausted mind. People ran out onto the icy deck, claiming to see a rescue ship on the empty horizon. Reality blurred, mixing with delusional visions born of hunger and deep despair. He realized that the most dangerous thing was not the cold, but the despair that ate away at a person from within. The crew began to divide into camps, each looking for someone to blame for their misfortunes. Pumping out water became a meaningless routine that took away the last bits of warmth. The icy water burned their feet, penetrating through their holey boots and causing cramps. If the pump stopped for even a minute, the water level in the hold rose rapidly. They continued in this hellish cycle because stopping meant instant death. At first, no one wanted to say it out loud, but death had already settled on board. The long polar night sucked the life out of them like a giant invisible parasite. The starry sky above their heads was indifferent and cold, promising neither salvation nor comfort. During this period of slow destruction, a new type of person was formed, a doomed person. It was a moment after which everything changed in their souls and crippled bodies. History had already begun to unfold toward its darkest and most tragic finale. In June, the ice began its final deadly assault on the ship's battered wooden hull. The pressure rose to a critical level, and the frames burst with a deafening crack like gunshots. Ice blocks rose above the mass, crashing onto the deck and smashing everything in their path. None of them yet understood the scale of the destruction until water poured into the cabins. Everything changed in a second when the ship tilted at an incredible angle. The captain gave his last order on board to immediately abandon the sinking ship with everything necessary. People in a panic threw boxes of biscuits, sleeping bags, and 3 small boats onto the ice. Panic spread faster than the cold as sailors slid across the flooded deck. The water engulfed their home at a frightening speed, pulling the wreckage into a dark, icy abyss. It was at that moment that they ceased to be explorers and became survivors. They stood on the fragile ice floe and watched silently as the black mass disappeared under the water. No one said a word, the silence broken only by the roar of the water at the site of the wreck. With the disappearance of the ship, the last physical connection to civilization and home was gone. The horizon was empty, and each of them knew perfectly well that there was no help coming. On that day, the real countdown of their lives began, measured by the steps they took on the ice. The realization that no one would come to their aid hit them with full force. The world continued to live its busy life, but for them, time stood still on this white plain. They were crossed off the list of the living, becoming disembodied shadows at the edge of the earth. He still hoped that someone was looking for him, but his mind told him that the search had long since been called off. Hope died with the ship, giving way to cold, calculating despair. People sat on abandoned crates, their heads in their hands in a futile attempt to hide from reality. They were separated not only by the icy desert, but also by doubts about their own ability to reach the shore. They looked at each other and saw fear mixed with complete incomprehension of what to do next. The captain still remained calm, unfolding maps of Siberia on a piece of dirty tarpaulin, but no one wanted to believe that they would have to walk hundreds of miles on drifting ice. Every attempt to build a fire from the wreckage of the ship turned into a painful battle with the wind. The heat from the fire barely warmed their hands, failing to penetrate their frozen insides. They began to economize their words as well as their food, so as not to waste energy on empty conversation. The most dangerous enemy was not the storm, but the complete loss of faith in the meaning of further existence. Darkness fell quickly, bringing with it an intensification of the cold and a heightened sense of loneliness. Sleep on the ice was more like a brief loss of consciousness from complete exhaustion. People woke up screaming, unable to distinguish nightmares from terrifying reality. He did not know if he would survive the night, huddled in his frozen sleeping bag. The most frightening thing was not the physical pain, but the ringing silence of the indifferent cosmos above his head. The plan to march to the Siberian coast seemed insane, but staying put meant certain death. They packed the pitiful remains of their supplies into heavy oak boats, preparing to drag them along. There was no way back, because behind them lay only black ice. It was a moment that changed everything, turning sailors into ice desert porters. Nature did not try to kill them, it simply did not try to save them from their own weakness. The march across the drifting ice began with the heavy realization that every mile would be paid for with blood. The men strapped themselves into harnesses, dragging the heavy boats behind them over the uneven surface of the pack ice. Ice ridges blocked the way, forcing them to carry their load on their hands over the icy mountains. The surroundings were a chaos of broken ice floes covered with slippery snow and hidden cracks. Each step became harder than the last, requiring incredible tension in every muscle. The physical condition of the team deteriorated with every hour of this inhuman work in the cold. The soles of their shoes wore away, and the men walked almost barefoot over the sharp edges of the frozen water. Traces of blood on the white snow marked their path like a grim guiding thread. They kept going because stopping in these conditions meant quickly freezing and dying. No one wanted to take responsibility for giving up, so everyone pushed on with their last ounce of strength. The ice drift played a cruel joke on them, carrying them back north as they walked south. After walking the hardest miles of the day, they discovered from their instruments that they had strayed from their goal. This discovery killed their morale faster than the most severe polar frost. He was not prepared for what would happen next when the compass showed the negative result of their torment. With each passing day, hope grew thinner, threatening to break at any moment. The decision to change course toward more stable ice was not an easy one for the captain. They had to abandon some of their equipment to lighten the sleds and increase their speed. The consequences of this step meant even less comfort and reduced chances of survival. The worsening situation forced them to eat the dogs that had previously loyally pulled their load. The team began to crack at the seams, exhausted people lashing out at each other over the slightest thing. Suddenly, the horizon began to darken, heralding the appearance of open water on the way to the mainland. This was both a joy and a new mortal danger, as the ocean did not forgive mistakes in boats. They launched the boats, trying to maneuver between the floating chunks of old ice. From that moment on, time became their main enemy in the fight against the approaching autumn storm. Everything was decided here and now, in a constant struggle with the icy waves crashing over the sides. The storm broke suddenly, severing the connection between the boats in a matter of minutes. Huge waves hid their comrades from view, leaving each crew alone with the elements. Everything changed in a second, as cries for help were drowned out by the roar of the hurricane-force winds. The horizon was empty, and he knew it, clutching the wooden side of the boat with his white knuckles. They were separated not only by an icy desert, but also by the merciless wall of the raging ocean. The storm mercilessly scattered the three tiny boats to different ends of the vast bay. One of the boats disappeared into the abyss without a trace, taking with it the lives of an entire section of the exhausted crew. No one heard their last cry, drowned out by the roar of the crashing waves. The survivors in the other boats could only pray, fighting for every second of their existence. It was a moment that changed everything forever, reducing their numbers by a third. The surroundings were a maze of frozen channels, islands, and endless snowfields. The temperature was dropping rapidly, heralding the imminent onset of the harsh Siberian winter. The situation was made worse by the complete lack of game and supplies for the captain's group. They began to eat their own sealskin shoes in an attempt to satisfy their empty stomachs. With each passing day, hope grew fainter, dissolving into the frosty air. Engineer Melville's boat was luckier, as they were able to find a deeper channel. They managed to meet local Yakut hunters who did not understand their language, but understood the language of hunger. A warm yurt and fresh venison were a real miracle for them after months of icy hell. But Melville could not find peace, knowing that his comrades were freezing to death somewhere. The question was not whether everyone would survive, but who would find the others first. DeLong's group slowly made its way south, losing people one by one to frostbite and starvation. They left their dead comrades right there in the snow, not even having the strength to dig a shallow grave. At that moment, he did not yet realize that soon he himself would lie next to them on this frozen ground. He was not afraid of death. He was afraid of not being found and disappearing forever into this emptiness. The world continued to live, but for him, time had stopped in this icy swamp. The captain continued to write his diary with his freezing fingers, recording the chronicle of their demise. The entries became shorter and shorter, reflecting their rapidly fading vitality. Words about weakness and complete hopelessness became the leitmotif of the last days of the expedition. He no longer counted the days, he counted the chances of his people surviving another icy night. But time was already working against him, taking the last crumbs of warmth from his exhausted body. DeLong's diary ended with a short entry about the death of the last members of his small group. Soon he himself fell silent, covered by a thin layer of falling Siberian snow. A long journey awaited them, and they traveled it to the end, stopping only when their hearts stopped. The world was too far away to hear their last, silent sigh of relief. Everything was decided here and now, and nature had delivered its final, unconditional verdict. The sailors sent for help miraculously encountered local residents and a group led by Engineer Melville. But the onset of fierce winter storms made it impossible to immediately search for the captain's missing group. Melville was eager to go into the tundra, realizing that every minute lost meant someone freezing to death. They still believed that rescue was possible if they could find them sheltered in a cave somewhere. But hope does not change reality, and the reality was that there was no one left to rescue. It was not until the following spring that a search expedition discovered George DeLong's last camp. Fragments of clothing and the frostbitten hands of dead sailors were visible under the snow. The captain lay next to his diary, his arm outstretched as if in a last attempt to send a signal. This sight made the hardened rescuers take off their hats and bow their heads in silent shock. None of them yet understood the magnitude of the courage with which these people had met their end. The physical condition of the bodies found spoke of the unimaginable suffering they had endured before their deaths. They were emaciated to the point of being skeletons covered with skin, with frostbitten limbs. The decision to go through the Lena Delta proved fatal, but they simply had no other choice at the time. The consequences of this step now lay before Melville in the form of the frozen corpses of his close friends. The deterioration of the situation did not kill them immediately. It prolonged the agony, draining their lives drop by drop. The bodies of the dead were buried on a high hill, over which a massive wooden cross was erected. This cross became a monument to their incredible resilience and an eternal symbol of the human spirit. The world continued to live. Newspapers printed sensational articles, and then people moved on to other news. But for those who remained under that cross, time stopped forever in the icy desert. They ceased to be explorers and became eternal prisoners of the Siberian permafrost. The surviving members of the expedition returned home as heroes, but their eyes forever retained the imprint of ice. They could not forget the cries of their comrades disappearing in the ocean storm and the silence of the freezing people. In the civilized world, everything was more complicated, but there, in the ice, everything was honest and frighteningly simple. He was not ready for what would happen next, when dreams would take him back to the sinking ship. The most frightening thing was not the pain he had experienced, but the memory of the silence that had engulfed their friends. The wreckage of the Jeannette was later found off the coast of Greenland, confirming the theory of ice drift. The ship had traveled the journey that its creators and passengers had been unable to complete. It became a silent ghost of the ocean, delivering the last message of the dead to the world of the living. The horizon was empty, and the ghost ship knew it, drifting through the years in endless miles. From that moment on, time became not an enemy, but the sole keeper of their dark secret. The Arctic continues to remain silent, hiding hundreds of other untold stories under the ice. It is neither evil nor good. It simply exists according to its own incomprehensible laws. We come there as guests, but often remain there forever as eternal captives. He still believed that man could conquer nature, but nature only smiled indulgently. At first it seemed like a great adventure. Then it became an icy sentence for all participants. The ending of this story sounds not like a victory anthem, but like a quiet requiem accompanied by the howling wind. They disappeared into the white mist, leaving behind only diaries and frozen graves at the edge of the world. As the viewer delves into this story, they feel only the bone-chilling cold and inevitability. Nature did not try to kill them. It simply did not try to save them from their own ambitions. The Arctic did not kill them quickly. It simply waited.